The walls inside Buckingham Palace are cracking, and what is spilling out is ugly. Royal watchers say the family is in serious crisis. And sitting at the very heart of it is Camilla's son, Tom Parker B.S., who has just been violently pushed out of the royal circle after Princess and made a disturbing discovery about him that shook the palace to its core. And I don't think either of those two could have music been able to cope. They've been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there. Camilla is running desperately to contain the destruction. But she is too late, because what is coming for her next is darker, more devastating, and more final than anything she has ever faced before. The son she could never bring with her. Tom Parker B.S. watched his mother become Queen of England and understood in that same moment that her crown would never protect him. While the world celebrated Camilla's coronation, something else was quietly happening behind palace walls. A door was being closed permanently, music, and the person who helped close it was Princess, and who had been building her case against Tom for years. She had been gathering every horrible thing he had done and had been filing it. That file started in the most painful place imaginable. It started with Tom, still a teenage boy, watching his family get torn apart in front of the entire world. Tom Parker B.S. was still a teenager when his parents' marriage collapsed on the global stage. His father, Andrew Parker B.S., was a decorated military man, respected, dignified, music, and yet he was publicly humiliated in the most savage way possible, confirmed in front of hundreds of millions of people as the man the future king of England had betrayed. Tom had no choice but to watch all of it. He could not escape it and could not outrun the label it burned onto him from that point forward. He was Camilla's son. That was his identity before anything else he would ever do or become. And the woman that label attached him to was, for a very long time, one of the most despised human beings in Britain. But that wound was only the beginning, because in 1999, Tom Parker B.S. detonated a crisis that nearly burned everything his mother had been carefully, painfully building. And he did it in the most reckless way imaginable. A journalist working for the News of the World posed as a wealthy Arab sheik and made contact with Tom. What followed was recorded on tape. In that recording, Tom Parker B.S. offered to supply cocaine and cannabis. He was formally cautioned by police, and the story erupted across British media with a kind of explosive force that leaves permanent scars on everyone it touches. The drugs were not the only thing. They were just the thing that got out. There was a woman married. Her husband was a recognizable face, the kind of name that sells newspapers on its own. The two of them had been seeing each other for months before someone close to the situation got nervous enough to make a phone call. Not to the press, to the kind of people who exist precisely to stop things reaching the press. It was handled. The husband never spoke publicly. The woman never spoke publicly. And the story died in a drawer somewhere before it ever reached the public. Then there was the gambling. Those close to Tom during that period say the debts got serious enough that people around him were genuinely frightened about who might come collecting and what that conversation might look like if it happened somewhere visible. And then there were the antiques. Quiet rumors passed between people in media and art circles that certain pieces moving through Tom's network during that period did not have clean histories. Nothing was ever proven. Nothing was ever charged. But the rumors never fully went away either. They just got buried under everything else. The timing of all these was not just bad, it was catastrophic. Camilla was still fighting day by day to make herself acceptable to an institution and a public that largely hated her. And her son had just been caught on tape offering to supply illegal drugs to a complete stranger. The palace was furious. Charles reportedly had to step in personally to begin managing the fallout. Tom had not just humiliated himself. He had grabbed a lit match and held it directly underneath his mother's entire future. The palace spent enormous energy putting that fire out without anyone seeing them do it. The story eventually faded, but the palace did not move on. That drug issue went into the record, and it stayed music there. Every decision made about Tom Parker B.S. from that point forward was made with that record sitting in the background. Now here is the detail that makes everything else in this story land with its full devastating weight. After all of that, Camilla became queen. Her portrait hangs in official spaces. Her name appears on state documents. She sits beside the King of England at the most formal and powerful occasions this country produces. The crown is on her head. The throne is beneath her. She made it. And Tom Parker BS got none of it. Not a single penny of public funding. No sovereign grant allocation, no official residence, no royal title, no formal role of any kind inside the institution his mother now sits at the top of. While Camilla was being crowned, Tom was a food critic. He built his entire career by his own hand with no protection from the family his mother had joined at the cost of everything. That gap between what Camilla became and what Tom was permitted to become is one of the most quietly devastating realities in this entire story. And it did not happen by accident. It is the result of decisions made deliberately and enforced across many years by people who had decided very clearly that Camilla's elevation would not extend to her son. The question that now burns through everything is who exactly had been drawing that line from the very beginning and making sure it never moved in Tom's direction. The answer to that question begins with Princess and a woman who had been watching Tom Parker BS for years. A woman who had been building something quietly, patiently, methodically, and she was almost ready to use it. The woman watching him for years. To really understand why and watch Tom the way she did, you first have to understand what and thought of his mother. Because the coldness started with Camilla, and it never thawed. Royal biographers, including Penny Junor and Robert Lacey, have documented that Princess and was one of the very last senior royals to accept Camilla's presence within the family. And even after she accepted it, that acceptance came with no warmth and no generosity. When Camilla first began making efforts to build bridges, she did what people in her position do. She sent flowers. She sent gifts. She tried. One delivery arrived at Anne's residence with a handwritten note attached. Anne looked at it. She did not open it. She turned to her staff and said flat and cold, "Take it to the trash where it belongs. Nothing good can come from someone who wrecks homes." The flowers went in the bin. The gesture died there, and did not despise Camilla in a loud or dramatic way. Music, it was quieter than that and far more dangerous. It was the controlled fury of a woman who believed that what Camilla had done to the monarchy was a wound that would take generations to fully heal. Anne's entire identity is built around a single principle: music, that she has never wavered from for a single day of her public life. Your position within the royal family is earned through service, sacrifice, and music relentless duty. You do not walk in through a side door because a king is in love with you. You earn your place through years of unglamorous, exhausting public work that nobody thanks you for. That is the standard and holds herself to every single day, without exception. And by that standard, Camilla had not earned a single thing. She had simply refused to disappear long enough for the institution to run out of ways to exclude her. And accepted Camilla because the decision had been made above her and resistance was no longer possible. But she never once lowered her guard, and she extended none of that reluctant tolerance to Tom. What and watched Tom build over the years made her furious. Tom had constructed a very successful public career as a food critic, author, and television personality. Major newspapers, book deals, primetime programs, all of it legitimate on the surface. But all of it was built in Anne's eyes on one thing: the fact that his mother was queen, and that connection did the heavy lifting everywhere he went. It opened music doors. It put him in rooms that a food writer with no royal ties would never have been allowed near, and saw that clearly. She had always seen it clearly, because here is the thing that burned her most. The royal family name carries weight because the people who bear it give their lives to earning that weight. They serve, they sacrifice, they show up for decades without complaint. Tom had done none of that. He had simply been born to the right mother at the right moment and let the association do its work quietly in the background while he built his career on top of it, and had spent 50 years earning every inch of her standing. Tom had inherited his by proximity music, and he had never once, as far as and was concerned, acknowledged the difference. Then Tom started doing something that genuinely alarmed Anne. He began making public comments about the royal family. In interviews and media appearances, he gave opinions about the institution as though he had real authority to do so. He spoke like his mother's position as queen made his views on royal matters worth listening to. Nobody in the palace ever told him that. Nobody ever would. He also got judgmental when the mood took him. He criticized people in power. And then there is the story that got passed around quietly in certain circles that Tom once told someone close to him that a specific senior royal was dumb and not fit to be there at all. The name attached to that comment, if it ever came out fully, would cause serious damage. And this was not just embarrassing. It was a direct attack on everything she stands for. The question she began raising behind closed doors was completely unanswerable in any comfortable way. If Tom said something publicly that exploded into a crisis, if he made a statement that forced the palace into a defensive position it had not prepared for, if his commercial activities crossed a line that dragged damaging and uncontrollable media attention back toward the institution, could the damage be contained? Every person in that room already knew the answer because they had already lived through it. The 1999 drug scandal had demonstrated with brutal clarity that Snort's Tom Parker BS could generate a full institutional crisis. The palace had managed that disaster through quiet intervention and enormous behind-the-scenes effort. But Anne's argument was cold. Managing a crisis once did not mean the underlying risk had been addressed. It meant the institution had been lucky, and luck was not a strategy for protecting the British monarchy, and had been building this case for years. She had everything she needed, and now she was ready to walk into a room and put it all on the table in front of the people who had the authority to act on it. What happened when she did would send shock waves through the palace, and it would place Camilla in the most impossible and devastating position of her entire life. The revelation that changed everything, and requested a private meeting with senior figures inside the royal household. Needed someone with the authority and the absolute will to make the decision final. And there was only one person left who fit that description. The door that was never going to open. When Charles received his cancer diagnosis, and the reality of a gradual handover of operational authority to William became impossible to avoid, something shifted inside the palace that went far beyond medical arrangements and scheduling logistics. Decisions about who belonged inside the institution, who had genuine access to the crown, and whose proximity was acceptable, began flowing through William's judgment. And William's judgment on this particular subject is not complicated, not negotiable, and has never once been ambiguous. William has been documented consistently by royal sources and commentators as someone who sees the monarchy through a framework so narrow and so deliberately defended that it functions almost like a fortress. Working royals, blood royals, people who have earned their position through official service and public duty. Everything else is outside the walls, and it stays outside the walls. He pushed back ferociously against Harry and Meghan when they attempted to construct a platform that blurred the line between royal and non-royal identity. He has been described by sources close to the palace as someone who views non-royal figures gaining influence or proximity through association alone with deep, genuine, and immovable suspicion. His vision of what the monarchy must be is a clean, tight, fiercely defended structure with clear boundaries and no tolerated ambiguity. Tom Parker BS measured against every single standard William applies does not belong inside those walls. Anne's revelation simply handed William the formal justification to enforce what his own judgment had already determined long before the meeting ever happened. And now it was finally time to remove Camilla's son. William wasted no time. He immediately made all needed calls, signed necessary documents, and Tom's life began falling apart. This is where what happened to Tom becomes truly brutal. The palace never told him. No formal decision was ever put in front of him. And that was entirely the point. Because if nothing was ever said officially, then nothing can ever be proven. Tom has no moment he can point to, nothing to challenge, nothing to appeal. The door was closed on him, and nobody ever admitted they closed it. What they did instead was simple. They just stopped letting him in. Invitations quietly stopped arriving. His name was dragged off guest lists without a word of explanation. Events he had previously been present at went ahead without him. And nobody offered a reason, an apology, or even an acknowledgement that anything had changed. People who had previously been warm toward him became formally polite. Formally polite curdled into distance. Doors that had previously required no effort to open began staying shut regardless of how hard he pushed. Tom Parker B.S. is not a naive man, and he is not a stupid one. He understood exactly what was happening to him. He could trace the outline of the decision that had been made about him, even though nobody had ever confirmed it existed. And he could not say one word about any of it publicly, because the moment Tom speaks, everything collapses. The moment he sits down for an interview and describes what was done to him, he becomes the crisis. Every headline immediately becomes about the Queen's son causing problems for the palace. Every conversation drags back to 1999, back to the drug caution, back to every piece of damaging history the institution and its allies would deploy against him within hours of him opening his mouth. He would not win that fight. He would be destroyed in it quickly and publicly and without mercy. And the person who would pay the steepest price for his destruction would not be Tom. It would be Camilla. Every story about his bitterness becomes a story about instability surrounding the Queen. Every headline about his exclusion becomes a question about her judgment and her loyalties. Every piece of damage crashes directly into the woman he loves most. So Tom does what he has always done. He writes his food columns. He films his television programs. He shows up to the events he is still allowed to attend and leaves when he is supposed to. He stands next to his mother when the occasion permits and steps back when it doesn't. From the outside, it looks calm, controlled, almost comfortable. It is none of those things. Tom knows he is being watched. There are reports that William has made that clear in person, that at one event where the two of them crossed paths, William looked at him directly and said quietly with no room for misunderstanding, "Don't cross me." Tom has not crossed him. He stays in his lane, not because he has made peace with any of this, but because the alternative is dragging his mother into a war she cannot afford. Tom knows exactly what William is capable of. He has watched what this family does to people who become inconvenient. He has seen how quietly and completely a person can be removed. And he knows that William has the power to finish what and started. One wrong move, and William doesn't just come for him. He comes for everything his mother has spent her whole life building.